Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Pop Culture Podcast. How you all doing? Hope everything's going well in your world at the moment. I'm enjoying a little bit of sunshine here up in Point Lonsdale, and feels a little bit as though summer's come early, even though spring's just started. But I'm working on my tan a little bit, which has been nice. It's been good to get out on the beach path and start cutting a couple of laps, trying to get the summer body ready a little bit. Hey, I've been saying to you for a little while now, if you've been listening, that I'm pretty keen to start bringing some more interviews to the podcast. So it's a very silly podcast usually. This podcast is it's a very, very silly podcast. And if you've been listening to it for a while now, well, you know, that's probably not news to you. But today we mix things up a bit, and we mix it up in a big way because my very oldest friend is coming on the podcast. His name is Burt Gurshater. We share a 40-year-old age gap, 40-year age difference. He's 76 years old. And I say that just to preface the fact that this guy's the happiest, most joyful bloke I've ever met. He's content, he's chilled, he's relaxed. He's one of those guys that's just got a love for life. And I met him through a running podcast that I host called Relaxed Running. And this guy's a sports psychologist. He used to work at Northern Arizona University, worked with a number of Olympians, a number of athletes that I know. And I was recommended to get him on that podcast. And we started speaking maybe just over 2 years ago, around 2 years ago. And we hit it off. We get on like a house on fire. I met him face to face for the first time just a few months ago when I was in Bend in Oregon. And I'm excited to introduce you to him. He's wise, he's fit, he's healthy, and he's just got so much to bring to the table. So, hey, we get pretty deep. We have a little bit of a laugh, but I also ask some pretty deep questions. I'm still learning the process with interviewing, all right? So some of the questions are pretty direct, pretty out there. Give me a break. I'm just figuring it out. We're brand new to this, all right? We'll figure it out together. So I really hope you enjoy this episode. It is available over at YouTube as well. So if you just type my name, Tyson Popplestone, there should only be one of those into YouTube. Jump over, subscribe there. Enjoy this conversation. Let me know if you enjoy it. As I said, the solo podcast will be back. We're going to alternate it. 1 week interview, 1 week solo podcast. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, enjoy this conversation with myself and Burt Gurshater.
It's great to see you.
Oh, right back at you, man. Right back at you. You know, the amount of times that Jesse and I have spoken about how much of a blast it was to hang with you guys in Bend over the last couple of months. I know I've told you that I would have been a better friend in like the 50s or 60s where there wasn't so much pressure on emails and social media, but we definitely talk about you guys a lot. And man, what a blast that was hanging with you in Bend. The time just sort of flies by though, doesn't it?
It was. I mean, when you guys left, when we're kind of just still just calm and just going, wow. I mean, it was so one of those times. It was just. It's like I don't know, like we were together our whole lives, and it was just beautiful. I mean, every moment. So we got this. I got tears in my eyes as I'm talking.
It was awesome, man. It was awesome. And the meal that you guys put together. How's it all been going since we last saw you?
We have a pretty simple life. You know, we just you saw where we live on the compound with our family, and that's a big part of it. The kids went to school the other day for the first day of kindergarten, so that was exciting. Just a big life change to see the 5-year-old going off into the world, and mommy for the first time in 9 years was home. So her whole life is different. So, but life for us has been, thank God, really, really nice. You know, just a lot of good things. And this is one of them. I've been looking forward to hanging out with you and hearing some of your questions. And just so you know, you sent me like, oh, these could be, these will be some of the things I'm interested in. And I actually kind of went out of my way not to think about that because I didn't want to prepare. I didn't want to say something what I want to do is just see what comes to me. You know, just be spontaneous and do it that way. So just so you know, I mean, I know what they are, but I hadn't put a lot of thought about. These are my answers. These are my answers. But it let me know, where we might be going.
Yeah, beautiful, man. Now, the reason I sent it through is because for everyone listening, Burt and I we actually met through a mutual friend of ours, Dave McNeil, who's a top Australian runner, and I host a running podcast out of here, as you know, Burt, because you've been on there a number of times. And I think as much as I love talking about running and that part of the world, I felt like some of the themes that me, you, and Dave got into on the running podcast is, well, I'm just as interested in those themes as I am in the running world. And I thought, well, maybe the running platform's the wrong place for this particular conversation, because I'd love to venture out. And so I thought, I better ask you, or I better send you a bit of an idea of what I'm thinking, just so you've got a bit of an idea that I was thinking a new direction. But I think some of our best conversations, like we've learnt now, are fairly spontaneous, and doesn't surprise me at all to hear you say that. So, and standard story, Burt, this one's the same as the other one. Wherever we end up, it always seems to be interesting. So we'll just we'll see where it leads us. But I thought,
dive in.
As a little way to kickstart it, one of the things that I loved when I first met you in person, which is crazy to say because we've spoken a fair bit over the podcast the last, sort of 2 years, was we got to your house in Bend. It was the first time that we saw you face to face. I knew that you've got the record of my oldest friend, Burt. I think you're 76, are you?
76.
76. So you've got the record. It's funny, and I walked into your house and I thought, I really hope it's as natural as it feels. Just having a chat over the podcast. You took me into the study. You took me into your studio. You sat down. You opened one of your books that you read through on a regular basis, and you go, "Here's a verse that I love," and you just flicked to a random page and read it out. And I thought, man, when I'm 76, if I can have that much joy about such a small thing, I know I'm heading in the right direction. And that's something I'm curious about, because as much as I hate to admit it, I feel like cynicism, whether it's a result of missing a couple of goals or just getting a little bit familiar with the way that life works, I notice it creeps in without a little bit of work, or without a lot of work in my case. I've got to be on the ball to make sure that I'm not too grumpy. And Jesse and I can tell you that plenty of times I've failed miserably. But what I was curious about, and the reason I preface this by saying you're my oldest mate at 76, is cool. You're also probably the mate that radiates the most joy out of all of my mates. Every time I see you, I don't know if you feel it all the time, but you've got something deeper going on there. And I was curious to use that as a bit of a launch pad to the conversation. What's that about, Burt? How did you manage that? Because I can't believe that that's something that just happened naturally.
Wow. Stunning question. Good question. I do think that from day one, from the early days, I was blessed to have good energy. I can't, Michael Jordan had jumping skills. Everybody comes in with, some skills. And I was always voted president of my class. And, whatever that was, I had something, right? Over the past 16 years, and we can talk about sort of the dateliners, but I've just been paying more attention because like everybody, I've got internal battles. That's sort of the nature of the world. We'll talk more about that, or life. But I did get more aligned and more disciplined in my spiritual life, and understanding that we are the only ones, the only species in the whole planet that actually has free will, and we can choose between one thing and another thing. And for past quite a few years, I've just been consciously practicing being connected to my gratitude, lying in bed when I can't sleep, just doing my best to be thankful. When my mind really wants to go crazy and be worried about everything, but one of the things that I've gotten better at through practice is know that when those negative voices come in, like you were just talking about, they don't have to be the ones that stay there. We've got a whole nother voice that we can choose to do, that most of us are never taught that, and we get to be almost a slave to those other voices, because it's very simple to go, oh, there's this wonderful rabbi in the 1700s. He called the Baal Shem Tov, and he had a practice that was called trying to think of the Hebrew name, but it's basically called glued to God, glued to God, and so like all day long, I've sort of practiced being in a state of gratitude. It's pretty neat, you know. It's like every spare moment, and also or every moment that I can, and also when I feel the negative stuff coming in. So I believe that a good part of it is just a lot of what I've been paying attention to. I literally stopped watching the news about 5 years ago for all kinds of good reasons. But I think primarily is that if you just look at the energy of the news, it's not positive. That's the purpose of it. And as a culture, and maybe even as a species, I think we're addicted to that energy, and
Yeah.
then we get manipulated, and that becomes people believe that's the world, and it is. You know, if anything, that is not the freaking world. Excuse me, you know, but that's the news. That is not the world.
I was
So,
listening. Yeah.
yeah, go
Sorry,
ahead.
Bert, you go on. No, I was going to say, I was listening to a podcast a while ago, and a neuroscientist, I think his name was Andrew Huberman, was being interviewed. And Andrew Huberman flipped the interview on the interviewer and asked about what the interviewer believed was humanity's most enjoyable state of emotion to be in. And the interviewer guessed what I guessed in the moment and say, oh, happiness. And he goes, no, surprisingly, the thing we get the most dopamine release from is mild irritation and mild anger. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because you look at the way that the news is structured, or even the YouTube algorithm is structured, and words like anger or can you believe or disaster, it tends to steal a lot of the attention. And I see that a lot, like mild irritation, especially during the last couple of years here in Australia through COVID, meant there was more than mild irritation that was still in my attention. And the amount of news articles and videos that I was watching based around that subject, I couldn't help but catch myself a couple of times going, oh man, there's something in that. And it's like not going to the gym. I find it's the easy thing to fall into. It's just sitting on the couch and taking it easy. Whereas the flip side of that is going, all right, well, as you're saying, we've got the opportunity to choose what it is that we focus on. And I don't know how, I guess with anything, practice makes it easier, but how do you find that process? Because getting the ball rolling from going from a negative state of mind to a more positive state of mind is often the hardest part.
No question. No question. And it doesn't make any difference if you're everybody. I mean, I just got off the phone with a guy who's, the best marathoner in his country, and he's battling, or maybe the second, I don't know. He's up there. Anyway, he's on the national team. And he's battling the demons on both sides. We mapped them out today. The one says, I can't do this anymore. You can't do this anymore. Your body's falling apart. And the other one says, oh, you're so cool. You're great. So the demons come in two however they need to get you away from being in that middle part where you're actually connected. So it was just fascinating just to talk. I was in a group of people. My daughter and I were doing a program at the end of a school program a few months ago. And one of the teachers were just talking about the past year. And she said, ma'am, I've been so negative with myself. I just had all these doubts. And I just looked around at the other 25 people and said, how many of you have this? And everybody raised their hand. So I really come to a new awareness, that, and actually I read it in a book recently too, that if you think there's something wrong with you because you have these negative thoughts, in a way that's very egotistical, because who doesn't? It's like the human condition, which I think it's a beautiful way to look at it. So, I actually forget exactly what your question is, but down this line, what I've come to recognize more and more and more, and I'm so blessed to live till 76. I don't think I had it at 74 or maybe even 75. But this awareness that at any given moment, well, first of all, that we're all in this together. The negative voices come. That's part of the human condition from the beginning of time, and we have a job to do, which is not to let them run the show. So.
And that's a decision you've made. You've gone, all right, well, if that's the decision I've got to make, I'll work at that. And there's a lot of strategies. I've got a list in my phone, actually, of the most effective things that work for me whenever I catch myself and I'm sort of aware enough to go, all right, Tosh, you've been a bit of a dick that I can go through and find really helpful. In fact, I was listening to, do you remember she was like the pop singer from the 90s is what she's known for. Her name was Jewel.
Oh yeah, I didn't know her, I didn't follow her, but everybody knew the name.
Yeah, sure. I was exactly the same. Like I would never admit in public how much I liked her music, but I listened to a podcast with her. She was on Joe Rogan about 12 months ago, and she said that she pays attention to when she feels free and when she feels stressed, and she started taking a note of where those particular times are. And for me, like too much time on my phone or just doing work without going outside and getting some sunlight or whatever, I start to notice that tension building up. Whereas the flip side of that is we live, the beach is just there. We've got a nice bush path. I'll walk up to you got it pretty good too. For those listening, Bert's rolling his eyes at me about how tough I'm doing it. We've got a dirt path that walks all the way along the beach, about 2 miles up to a little town where my gym's at. And man, like the amount of time I'll go out there and I'll just cop a little bit of sunshine on the way to the gym. That's where I go, okay, I'm a better person out here. And I'm just trying to figure out how to bring that kind of energy, back into a relationship or back into an argument or back to a podcast when the internet's not working, So are there certain strategies that you found really helpful?
Oh, wow. Yes, absolutely. Number one is whenever we get fearful, anxiety, our breathing pattern changes. It's 1 + 1 = 2. We're no longer breathing in our belly. If anybody's taking a yoga class and yoga, you ask the teacher, what's the most important part about yoga, which is this beautiful, peaceful way to be, they'll always say it's breathing. Breath. Isn't that tough? All these body motions and stuff like that, they're just so, what's the most important part? Breathing. That's fascinating. So a few years ago, I just started to really pay attention to that. And so it's part of everything I do. I start my sessions with breathing in the belly, slowing it down. Because when we're fearful and we're in an anxious state, that's automatic. We don't choose it. It's a fearful state. We're in fight or flight. Or we can even get to freeze, which is one step below that, where we're just locked up. And the part of the brain that's activated at that point with the less oxygen, and this is pretty strictly because we're animals, is the lower brain. And it's biological. And that's what you were talking about before. It's just the biological part, which is fascinating. As soon as you begin to breathe into your belly, we can do it right now. I mean, just for even 2 breaths, you can feel something different. Begin to activate the higher part of the brain, which is the part of the brain that gets activated in a meditative, prayerful, connected state. When you're at peace outside, looking at the ocean, automatically it's going on. And what we have, to me, now that I've been more aware of this, when we say that we have free will, that to me is in any given moment, we've got a choice between fear and being locked up and all the things that come with that, or the higher one that says, it doesn't even say it. It just feels and it knows that we're all connected. And so that's one breath. And I do that consciously all day long. In the middle of the night, if I wake up, besides the words that I was saying, the gratitude, I just breathe in my belly. And then when I can't go to sleep, I don't take that as a problem. I take it as an opportunity to breathe and be thankful and to rest. It's a beautiful switch. So breath is way up there. Then another one, and I don't know the exact nature of your podcast. Does it generally take a spiritual direction? Is that the deal?
What's a good question. I reckon the listeners would be laughing because not necessarily. It's so this is a podcast where I've done a few sporadic interviews and I'm going to make them more regular. But a lot of the time it's just me talking about things that I've been thinking about. And yeah, sometimes maybe it's spiritual, but a lot of times it's probably embarrassing. Maybe those two intersect somehow. So, but I wanted you on to talk about this particular stuff, Bert. So, hey, feel free to
Okay.
take it that direction.
So I like the word intersect, because another word for that is they're connected. And at some level, when I'm at most peace, everything's connected. You know, when we feel awful, then we also feel disconnected. But so another concept or practice is the practice of trust. I didn't know much about it. Somebody told me about a book about a year ago. It said you got to be, and it's old. I'm Jewish. It comes from the Jewish tradition, and trust in Hebrew is bitachon, and it's this beautiful book written hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And the sages who wrote it said, or even the people who commented on it said, when you finish this book, go back to the beginning and read it again. And then when you finish it, go back to the beginning and read it again. Because the concept of trust is amazing. And now this is particularly, in whatever higher power you believe in, that all of our doubts and our fears, we give up to, and our worry, if we don't trust in that moment, things are going to fall apart. But here we are sitting here, you and me. Things have worked out pretty well. Even when we couldn't get our internet to work. Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
Like even when we or when we're scurrying. I've gone out of my way not to scurry anymore. Because what I realized is I don't think once have I ever gotten someplace a little late that it made a difference. So all that scurrying and fears mean I don't trust that things are going to be fine. People love me just as much when I show up 4 minutes late.
Yeah.
So trust has been a big one. Just to trust it's going to be fine. Look at your life. And look at life. Look at like we trust 24/7 just because the world is working for us. We have air to breathe, we've got food to eat, we are so dependent. We have to trust all day long, and then if something is going wrong, then we panic. But when we plug something in, we know we're going to get electricity, and we unconsciously trust 24/7 just to live. So I've just brought that into just a practice, which is thousands of years old, and just to go, Bert, just breathe and come back here. Things are going to be fine, and that. And it's not in my hands. There's a great saying that says, let go and let God, and all those things, all the words are nice, but actually to bring that feeling and the reality into it, that actually becomes beyond words. It's practice. So that's some of the things I've done to get better at this as I've gotten older.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it's not necessarily something that you sit down for 20 minutes in the morning and go, all right, now this is where I do my spiritual time, or this is where I break the anxiety. It's something that, the scriptures, they talk about pray all day long. And essentially, I guess in a way, what you're saying is that like there's an awareness in you that goes, all right, well, through the scurry and all the worry, it hasn't really achieved much. So why not just try and take moments of consciousness throughout the day to go, all right, what's a better alternative to you freaking out about this situation? And that's maybe the most important part most important place to put it into practice.
Yeah. So it is. I think anybody who's good at anything practices a lot. And I've been blessed, however it happens, to work with, world-class runners. And it's just so beautiful to watch their dedication and how everything they do is about how am I going to live a life that can allow me to do the best that I can be. And their sleep is related, and their diet's related. And, their stretching is related, and their massages are related, and how far they. So we live, often just very. Let me back it up. The more conscious we can be, the more chance that we have to get to where we want to be. But it takes practice. The practice is maybe if at the end of this whole thing, what's the one word that's important? It could very well be practice.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's amazing. You brought up running as an example, and obviously, before I got involved in the comedy world and the Australian football world, my sport was purely dedicated to running. A little bit like Dave McNeely, our mutual friend, and I often say how grateful I am that I found that at a young age, because it showed you the importance of practice. It showed you the importance of discipline. But more than that, like, you had to learn to deal with bad races, and then you had to learn to deal with good races, and then you had to deal with the ups and downs and like the emotional roller coasters. And I often say, like, you've met Charlie now. He's 2. I like the idea of getting him involved in some form of martial art in the next couple of years, just because I think I just think the discipline, the respect, just that practice that you've sort of brought up. But not just the practice of the movement, but the practice of I don't know. I see martial arts and especially jiu-jitsu and things like that as a great way to practice respect and sort of learn about authority and respecting authority. But more than that, if you develop an interest in it and a love for it, just realizing that, all right, if I want to get any better at this, I'm going to have to keep showing up, but also I'm going to have to get beat up from time to time. And that beating up's actually probably going to have some of the most valuable lessons, as frustrating as it is. I find that with comedy now, Burt, like, as much as I love to get up there and have the set of my life and feel like I just tore the house down, every now and then I'll get up and I'll just bomb so hard. And I go, what happened? Wow. Like, I've done those jokes before, and they got a really good response. And then you got to break it down, and some of it's like, okay, like what was the atmosphere in the room like when you walked in there? Was it, because if you walked into a room where there'd just been a bar fight, it's going to be hard to make people laugh. As an extreme example, the flip side of that is some people laugh at the drop of a hat. You go into a room sometimes, and you're like, oh, you're being too generous here. But the bombing, like sometimes I drive home, Burt, and I go, all right, what just happened? Because I need to get better, because that's humiliating. And as much as I hate it, some of my best notes come from those nights where things just fall apart.
So when that happens, I mean, obviously there are a few possible reasons. One is the audience and what's going on, right? I mean, that's what you're not in control of, and the other obviously is your presentation. So what do you walk away with when that, what do you? I don't know.
I always just blame the audience, so I don't have to look at myself. I'm only joking.
No, because I as a speaker, I'm a speaker. Mm-hmm. I've talked to some audiences who, as soon as I walk in, they're excited, and I walk into some audiences, as soon as I walk in, they're not excited. So and not really in control of that. Which is actually, if you think about another lesson in terms of joy, is to learn how to not take things personally. We've heard that from the beginning of ever. Hey, don't take it personally.
Yeah,
which literally is almost meaningless in a way, because they're words, they're the right words, and they're true words. But how to do that, I think, is a lifetime of trying to figure out how not to take things personally.
It's a great point. And if there's any place, honestly, like if there's any place that you feel it's personal, it's when, and this to a degree on stage. Like I feel like it's magnified when the only response that you're looking for a lot of the time is laughter. Like, sure, silence and that tension in the build up to maybe a punchline is fine. But if there's not laughter sort of every 30 seconds, that something's not going as well as it should be. And honestly, that's the hardest part from time to time. If you sit down after a bomb, it's hard not to feel like everyone in the room didn't hate you. And I think sometimes that's why it's good. I always film my sets so I like to pay attention to my body language. I like to get a bit of a feel for for the room that I'm recording. And sometimes I think the emotions of a bomb are so high that you're convinced everyone hates you. But when I look back, it's like you can see maybe they wanted to laugh in certain parts, but you might have rushed through a point because you felt like you were bombing. And just actually, how's this for a metaphor? I think sometimes giving your points or giving your punchlines a moment to breathe is something that I'm really learning, because when I'm nervous, I'll go from a punchline straight into my next point, and you might hear people go, "Oh, okay, we're going again." Whereas what a lot of the great comedians do, they'll get to a punchline, and especially if it's like a bit of a clever punchline, you need to let it breathe, to let it. You've had however many chances to practice this joke, so you know what it is that you're saying, but the audience is hearing it for the very first time, so they're sort of formulating it all. So sometimes I'll get to that punchline, and if you just have the confidence to go, all right, like leave it there for a minute, it's amazing how much laughter silence can draw.
Absolutely. Right. I mean, just that word. What's the first word that we practice? I said that's an important word. I think the word pause is maybe one of the most important words too, because then we're not in just moving along quickly. There's a grace to it, and then you allow. So I know in my talks and even in my sessions and even today, like right now, I mean, there's something beautiful about pausing. It's like, oh, I really I'm contemplating. I'm in this other. I'm letting stuff happen as opposed to trying to make stuff happen. and even in that, then we can go back to trust. That I don't have to make it happen. Yeah. So as a comedian, after you've said it, you go, oh, let them laugh, man. I just trust that you were funny. So that we'll see when this is all over, where we have practice and trust and pause and trust. There's 3 words that sort of just popping up that are big ones. Big ones for this whole idea of how to keep our peace.
Yeah. What's your story, Burt, with how you became Jewish? It's a question I've never asked you before, and it's a confusing one, because obviously you have cultural Jews, and then you have people who are later in their life. Like my mother-in-law has recently become. I can't remember the actual stream of Judaism that she's started following, but she was originally a Christian, and then she went into that scene. And I can't actually put my finger on exactly what it is I'm so fascinated about. I mean, there's plenty of things. You just have to look at the history of Jews over the last 150. Well, let's go back a couple of thousand years to realize that there's something about this people group that it's caught the attention of a lot of the wrong people, or a lot of the powerful people who like to take advantage. And I don't know. I'm always fascinated about the story of how people find themselves in the religion of Judaism, and I've never actually asked you that question.
Yeah, well, I'm basically, to the best of my knowledge, sort of connected to the beginning. My ancestors in Europe, my grandparents and their parents. I don't know too much beyond that, but they were Jewish. And they left Europe because they were Jewish. Because the turn of the century, the 1918 to 1900s, they were the pogroms. The Cossacks would ride in and just kill people. And that was before Hitler. That was just, and we've had that as Jews forever. That's just been part of our world. And I don't know all the reasons for that. I don't know that anybody does. A lot of books have been written about it, about why that is. So when my parents came here, that was so they were here during the Holocaust. And I actually think about that. Even today, I was thinking, here's what I was thinking about. It's related to what you were talking about earlier. Like when I get stressed out, I go, slow down, Burt. Can you imagine being a Jew in a camp? You just slow down and take in how wonderful things are. What are you doing being stressed out right now? It's really a beautiful thing, just to come back to this reality, which is most of us are living a dream. We are, in this amazing Western world that we have, day to day. just day to day. I'm not saying that the whole world is in that place. That's for sure. That's not true. But so I was born into that, and then I was a lot of Jews when they came to America wanted to cover their identity because they saw what happened. So I had relatives who changed their name from their Jewish name to, like, one guy went from Gershater to Green, because he just, that wasn't it. And many people sort of gave up the practice that their parents took. And that was true with my mother. My grandmother was very religious and stayed kosher. And her entire 8 children, none of them went in that direction. They just joined into the community. So that was my background. So I was raised as a Reform Jew, which is the most sort of relaxed version of not too many rules, but you still did the basics. You still did Hanukkah, you still did Passover, and you still did the New Year. And that was my life. So I had an identity as a Jew, but no practice. Very, very, very little practice. And very, very, very little knowledge. But I was bar mitzvah. That's when you're 13. You read from the Torah, and then you become whatever you become. Nothing really, but that's a stage, a milestone. 17 years ago, I was in Flagstaff in my office, in my counseling office, and a young man with a big beard, obviously a Jewish guy, knocks on my door and said, "Hey, can I come in?" And religious Jew, just wearing black, white, just yarmulke, huge beard, like mine. And he said, "Can I come in?" I said, "Sure, come on in. It's good to see you again." He said, "I've never been here before." I said, "Oh, there were 2 guys here last year that look just like you," because they do. I mean, they hang around. And I always thought that we, from our perspective, we always laughed at those Jews when we went to New York City. Hey, look at those guys over there, which is a whole nother story about how as soon as somebody's different, they're weird. That's it's easy for us to go there. Not a very healthy place to go. And this is what changed it. I'll tell you what changed it for me. I was not thinking 1 ounce about becoming more Jewish. Never crossed my mind. This guy comes in, and there was one teaching. There's one main prayer. If you ask anybody, a Jew, do you know anything? And what's the main prayer? And they'll say it's the Shema. And it's, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." And growing up, the whole time, I always thought, we figured out, Jews, because we're so smart, that they're not 5 gods. They're not all these different, gods. There's one God. We figured it out. We're so smart. And then the number, there's one. And then I was talking to this rabbi in our conversation. We were talking about one. He says, "Well, more importantly, beside this, there's one. There's nothing but one. Everything is part of the one. Everything is connected. That one," and the word is echad, one, just resonated with me. It's like, wow, I want to learn more about that. What does that mean? That everything that goes on is actually connected to something else. And we see it. I just walked outside in front of my house, where you've been, this beautiful plant there, and the butterflies were on the plant, and the bees were on the plant, and they were just doing their job. They knew what to do. In this world, you look every place, and there's just connections going on. I talked about it earlier, just how connected we are. There is a one that's so far beyond our understanding. I mean, now we can look out into the universe and see billions of years away, or what was billions of years away. So there was something about the awe that it struck inside of me that's literally beyond our understanding, but it's a state that I really believe is one we need more of. Because what we get down into, just awe that we could never take it all in and just be just in awe of it, which is a beautiful place to be. And that is also, it's a very ego-less state, which is also where we need to go in AA. they have a lot of acronyms. And their acronym from ego, EGO, is edges got out, which is cool. And it just sort of lets you know that's because then it's all about me. And whenever we're anxious or anything, it's all about me. that's the state. And letting go of that, awe is the opposite of that. It's like, whoa, I'm in this thing and I'm a tiny piece of it. And I'm blessed to be able to soak in this so much of this stuff, and I matter and I don't matter, all those things. I wish they taught that state in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Literally. In fact, one of the books that I read, it said it'd be nice to go to awe as a discipline once a day. In fact, even when I say echad, which is that one, that puts me closer to that. I do. I go one. And somebody asked me, Burt, one of your skills is to connect with people when you're with people. You connect. He said, is there a practice that you do with that? I hadn't even thought about it. But then I realized that going to that state of echad and awe and makes you connected, and I do that multiple times a day, probably does help me be closer to that state. It's a practice. I hadn't even put it together, that I actually do a practice to have that feeling of awe. So
that's really cool. I had a moment. It's kind of a disgusting example, but it's just funny because I was driving home from Melbourne last night. I was listening to a book. I think it's called The Last Highlander, and it's about a Scottish guy who went to Singapore during World War II to help protect it from Japanese invasion. And long story short was it was like a massive failure, and the Japanese, they took over, and he was a prisoner of war for maybe 2 years. And he was explaining that while he was a prisoner of war in a makeshift concentration camp, he, because they were in the tropics, they were in the forest in Singapore, I think they were. And he was explaining that one of the things that took a lot of people down was a tropical disease, a tropical ulcer. So due to the constant moisture, due to the, I don't know exactly what the cause was, but it was a flesh-eating disease where it got quite deep. He said at one stage it got so bad he could see the bone in the top of his foot.
Wow.
So he said at this particular concentration camp, there was a British doctor, and the British doctor, he saw this guy one day and he said, look, what you're facing, it's a tropical ulcer, but there's only one cure that we know of. And the guy goes, oh, what's that? And he goes, well, how do you feel about maggots? And the guy said, what do you mean? He goes, well, if you go to the toilet, there's a makeshift toilet, and absolutely covering the toilet are just like millions and millions of maggots. He goes, the best way for you to get on top of this, go and pick up a handful of them, put it inside your actual sore. They'll eat away the dead flesh of the foot. And as a result of these disgusting little creatures eating away the dead flesh, you'll be healed. And
wow.
he goes, it was my only option. And so he went in and he said he had never had so much respect for these little creatures. He went in, he put it on his foot, and he said 2 days later, he said he just put 5 or 6 on. And 2 days later, he said it was completely healed. The dead skin was gone, and you could already see rejuvenation taking place. And I thought, well, isn't that crazy? And I was just thinking that as you're explaining how everything's connected, maybe in ways that you wouldn't even want to acknowledge. But it is hard not to admit that it's the truth. Like, and obviously that's it's a crazy story of how it works. And I know what we're speaking about is much bigger than that as well. But it's amazing how whether you zoom right in or zoom right out, it's true. Like, things have a way of just working together. Let's put a little a full stop there. I was going to ask you another question, which takes it to another level, one that's not spoken about a lot, but I'm curious to hear your answer to. Is are you afraid of dying? Are you scared of death?
You don't mess around.
This is going to be the marketing point for the podcast. We'll start with that.
That's right. You don't mess around. You're afraid of dying. That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, it's like, certainly at 76, it's on my mind. I think about dying. And just I've had a heart attack when I was in my 50s. Um, so I think it's impossible for it not to be in the consciousness way more than it is when you're 26. Then you asked me a question: are you afraid of dying? I don't. Fear is probably not the best word, but there's something about, for me, it's 76 and knowing that I'll be blessed if I live another 10 years. That's reality. But I could live longer. It certainly does. It motivates me to continue doing what I'm doing, knowing that the clock is ticking. And there are just a lot of people who influence my train of thought that says, keep on doing your purpose. So in some ways it motivates me, but it's also, I've got to deal with the dark side too. It's like any dark thought that we've been talking about the whole time. And really, dying is as natural as breathing. So there's no way not to be concerned, or whatever the word is, about that, the greatest unknown that we have, which is death. And then to somehow come to peace with the one thing we can sure is going to happen. Right? It's like, I don't want to be afraid of the one thing I'm sure is going to happen from the day we're born. Like that's part of life. So I guess it's once again, it comes back to the things we've been talking about. It's like, if there's this thing there, and I can go to the dark side about all of, and I can also make a choice and say, okay, that's the way it is. I think about that. I just think about everybody who ever lived in history died. Nobody is still living. That's just every one of us does that. So I'm working. It's not like it just comes easy, but to have peace with that reality, and also I'm just blessed to have a wonderful wife and a wonderful family and wonderful grandkids, and I've had a good life. I don't have a lot of regrets, which I'm blessed. Just total. Not that I don't have regrets. I've got regrets, but so it's not something that I try to use it. In fact, I just studied this today with a rabbi. It's fascinating. The dark side actually reminds you not to stay there. It has a function. Because at least in the spiritual world, if you say everything was created by, that, well, there's a reason for it. And I really do think that's just a function that way. So if you go there, if I go, worry, then I can remind you, Burt, go back to what's true. Just go back to how amazing this time has been. And just like everybody else, we're going to leave this version. And the other part is, which is so true. In so many ways, we don't leave. We just have an influence that our energy stays. I talk to my dad all the time. Every time I go out cross-country skiing, I thank him for taking us skiing when I was 2.5 years old. And now my grandkids do it. So it goes back to maybe the very first thing we talked about, one of the first, that we do have a choice every moment where to put our energy. So I guess, it's a good question. It makes me ponder it one more time too. It's not something I dwell on in terms of fear. And once again, it's a practice. Where do I want to go with it?
Yeah.
And where I want to go is that it's been a blessed opportunity to be here for, even if it got shut off in a short time, but thank God I'm healthy. No, thanks for asking that question.
It's a good question. It's a question I'm interested in asking in everyone about, because obviously obviously, as you say, like we're in the minority, as Louis C.K., the US comedian, said, like, we're in the minority being alive. More numbers of humans have died than are currently living. And I think that's not a very funny point to put in your comedy special, but it's it's true. You know, I've just made some friends with a couple called Nick and Jana from our church that we've started going to here in Victoria. In Ocean Grove is the suburb. And the other day they were casually speaking about their daughters, saying how boys are more difficult than their daughters, but they only had one daughter with them. And my wife said, "Oh, your daughters, like what?" And I said, "Oh, one of our daughters passed away. She was one or 1.5 just last year." And anyway, I caught up with the pastor of our church, and we were having a coffee, and he's really good friends with this couple. And I said, "Hey, what happened with their daughter? Like, are you able to tell me?" She said, "Oh, it was like just an absolute tragedy. That the mum, Jana, was reversing the car, and it was just one of these horror stories that you hear." And she thought that her husband had the gate closed. Her husband thought that she had left the kids inside, and long story short, yeah, she was run over and killed. And what's so interesting, Bert, was these people like you radiate joy still. And we went around to their house for tea the other day or for dinner. We're there for 4 or 5 hours. And I had a chat with Nick. I go, "Man, like how are you doing this? Like how are you fine?" And for about half an hour he spoke to me, and beautiful story. Apparently the pastor of the church was telling me that he was at their house, a couple of hours after it happened, and he heard Nick go into his wife and say, "Hey, no matter what, I love you. We're getting through this."
Wow.
He goes, "It was a moment where no one was supposed to hear it. They thought they were in a room by himself. He just overheard it." And I thought, hey, what a beautiful thing to say just a little while after that. But what he said was one thing that really helped him deal with the death of the daughter is, so he's got faith in God. He believes in God. He believes in heaven. He fully believes right now. He goes, if I truly believe what I say I believe, then right now she's not stressed. She doesn't miss us. We just miss her. She hasn't had to experience that grief like we have. And he goes, yeah, there's moments that we cried. But everything that he does, he sees from the perspective of, he believes what he believes. He's a Christian guy, and he believes that everything, as you say, so it comes together for a reason. Yeah. And in his mind, the way he's explained it was, it's been an opportunity to share a message and to be an example of this message that he believes so well with people who otherwise might not have seen it. And it's just interesting I mentioned that just because we're talking about the subject of death, and I guess that's from the people left behind, that's a nice way to view it. But I guess also what you believe about where you're going after it changes the way you see it. Because I get caught up sometimes thinking about it. I heard about another guy when I was in America with my brother-in-law. He was just a learner driver, 16, in the car with his dad. He went to overtake a truck, swerved back in because there was an oncoming car, and swerved into a tree and killed his dad in the process. And just hearing from these people about how they've navigated these difficult times, I don't know, somehow it gives me more confidence about facing it as well, like actually facing death eventually, because it's like, well,
interesting.
I don't know what that is, but I guess the more you're exposed to it, or the more you see of it, I don't know if you find this is true. Like, I'm 35 and you've got another 40 years experience on me, but when you start losing people that I don't know, something about it gets less scary to me.
Interesting. Yeah, it becomes what life is, and it does. So it's a beautiful question, because even going there helps you come to grips with probably the biggest thing we have to come to grips with, that one. So it's just good for me to have these discussions. I want to just thank you because of your own connection to what's important in life. You guide us to those questions. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, awesome, Bert. I won't hold you up too much longer, but one of the other questions I was curious, and I knew we'll do this, and I'm glad we did. I think I've asked one question from the list I sent you.
So it's a good thing I didn't spend too much time trying to get the answers.
I'm glad you didn't. It's the last time I'm going to send questions to the podcast guest.
Good. So sort of give a banner, of what the whole thing might be
Yeah.
about.
We could talk about anything. Come prepared.
I like that banner. I like that. That's right. Or better yet, don't come prepared. Just come.
Yes, that's right. Hey, you've mentioned a couple of books that you're reading continuously at the moment, and one that I'm still yet to read, but I haven't forgotten about is the Music of Silence that you recommended to me when I was there. Are there any other books that you've been reading or that you've loved sort of over the last 12 months that you can remember off the top of your head?
So funny that you should do that. So what? What I have to tell you this one. I don't know if it's a gesture or not. But my daughter, my granddaughter, who was 8 at the time, she just turned 9. She was reading Harry Potter. She was totally engrossed in Harry Potter. And I said, "Man, you're reading Harry Potter?" And she looked at me and said, "Have you? I'm Baba." And she said, "Have you read it, Baba?" And I said, "No." And she looked at me like I was a freak. She said, "Bobby, you have to read Harry Potter." So literally for the past 4 months, now I'm actually on book 6. And I do, for those of you who haven't read it, it's amazing in a lot of ways. One, it's phenomenal creativity, phenomenal entertainment, but it's an ongoing story about the dark side versus the light side, the ongoing creative battle of that's just what goes on, and it's a never-ending deal. So it's really been entertaining, and it's way beyond just entertaining. It's the battle that we're all in our own versions of how we do it. Another one of my clients, this is really cool. Here it is.
Oh, yeah.
It's the Return of the Prodigal Son, by Henri Nouwen. And what's just phenomenal about this book, and this one, it just took me, because there's Rembrandt is a picture that he wrote, that he did, which is of the coming home of the prodigal son. I didn't even know what prodigal meant. I always thought it meant the one who returns, but it's really not. It's the one who wasted all of his money. Prodigal is wasting your money.
Ah.
I didn't know it.
No, me
right?
neither.
No, we always think it's the one who returned, right? No, it's the one who wasted everything, right? He asked his father when he was younger, "Can I have my share of the estate?" And he took it and he wasted it. And he came down to shreds, literally, And then he had a choice to be a slave, where he couldn't even eat the food that he was giving to the pigs, or he could go home and actually work for his dad and be a slave to his dad, but he could eat, at least he could eat the food, that was serving to the pigs. And he came home, and the picture is of him on his knees in shredded clothes, his feet torn up, with his head in his daddy's chest, and his daddy's hands just touching his shoulders, with a look that is so soft, letting him back. And the book is just about, the author's journey with this picture, and how he saw himself in all the characters. Both, and then there's the brother who was there, who, when the prodigal son comes home, his father says, "Let's have a celebration, and we'll celebrate. We didn't know if you were alive. Let's have." And the older brother is angry, and he's jealous. He said, "Man, I stayed here the whole time, and I didn't get anything." And he's looking, and you can see he's sitting there with a very distant look on his face, looking at this unbelievably touching scene. And the author goes through, first he saw himself as the prodigal son, because he saw how he wasted so much of things in his life. He was a Harvard professor, and he thought he was a big shot, and blah, blah, blah. And then he became, but really I see how resentful I can be. And he goes to the older son. And then ultimately, and this is what I love about this book, he said, but ultimately in my position, he was, I think, 50, 60 at the time, and a priest. He says, I want to be the father and welcome people back in, no matter what they did.
Mm.
it's just I think that's where we're all headed. We want to be the Father. So which is egoless, which says, you live how you live. That just, and tied to that, I was with our genius granddaughter who's 5 the other day, and I was talking to a friend about weird, just weird. And she's 5, and she says, "What does weird mean?" They want to know. What are you talking about, right? What does weird mean? So I try to tell a 5-year-old what weird means, and I said, it's like when somebody's so really different, and you call them weird. It didn't take her a second. She said, "Baba, we're all different." It's just stunning as a spiritual understanding that our judgments come because people are different. And the truth is we're all different. And this is the prodigal son, is about how you just accept people who maybe violated our values, and just see their soul and welcome them back. Mm. And we all have work to do to get to be the Father who can get to that point where we can do that. And that takes our own discipline and time, and going through, like we talked today, our own hard stuff and learning from it. Everyone is a lesson. So I would suggest reading The Return of the Prodigal Son by Henri Nouwen. And it's a beauty.
Awesome.
Yeah,
awesome, Burt.
It's a beauty.
Well, man, as always, what a pleasure. Always great to sit down with you and pick your brains and hear your wisdom and just have a little bit of fun. So, as always, it's an open invitation on here, Burt. I'd love to have you on, and maybe we can touch base again in a couple of months, because I feel like these kind of chats are worth 45 emails. So I always feel like a better friend after a phone call.
Thank you for making this happen, because really, just putting this together does a lot of things. Just gets me in touch with what's important, gets to share, which is what I'm in this world about. Get to connect with my new dear friend, you, and we get to march on this path that we're carving out. So I want to do it as often as we can do it. Well, let's do it. And,
awesome,
and everybody who's listening, I hope you're enjoying it as much as we are.
Yeah, beautiful.
All right.
If not, they're banned from the podcast, Burt, so they've got to enjoy it.
Absolutely. That's right. We can be the Father.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to show I've taken all the important nuggets of wisdom out of this conversation. If they don't like what we're about, they can leave it.
Absolutely. I'll drink to that.
Awesome, Burt.
All right.
Man, great to see you. I'll see you later.
Great
see you, everybody.